All right. Well, thank you all for attending the October HeinOnline webinar. Today is a special day. It's our first, in my memory, guest presenter for our HeinOnline monthly webinar series. And today we are joined by guest presenter Alan Keely. And I'll give a short introduction to Alan, talk a little bit more about what we're going to talk about, and then we're going to dive into the database. So also, before I get started, I do want to mention Roxanne Marmion is joining us as well. She's got her camera off, but she's going to be manning the question and answer box and the chat. So if you have questions that kind of pop up throughout the webinar, feel free to pop them into the question and answer box, and she will attend to those. And maybe if you want to, we might be able to save some for the end of the webinar, where if you have specific questions for Alan. So let me go through some slides first. So let's meet our guest presenter. Alan has got his camera on if you want to take a gander at him in the flesh. But here you can see, here's a picture of him. Alan is a retired associate director for collection services from Wake Forest Law Library. While he's a librarian by profession with a strong background in history and literature. I'll let him give you a little bit more of the background on how this whole project came about. But in a nutshell, he started reading Democracy in America during the summer of 2017, and he approached the Hein Company about how he felt it would be a great idea to use that book as the basis for a new database, where we went in and linked to all the different sources and cited materials that Tocqueville used throughout the book. So Alan went about researching the book. He identified sources, provided analysis and annotations. He built the links. He really did the lion's share of the work. And what we've come out with is a fantastic database that we're about to go over for you in this webinar. Me, the HeinOnline expert. I am Tim Hoagie. You've probably seen me plenty of times in these webinars. I'm the Senior Director of Sales. I'm based here at the HeinOnline mothership here in Gettsville, New York. Here's if you have any care about my interests, they're here. Probably the most important is that I'm a large Buffalo Bills fan. Shout out to Alan for suggesting I include that in my bio. So what are we going to do today? Some of the main bullet points. I'll give you a brief introduction to HeinOnline, as I regularly do. Then we'll jump into Democracy in America. That's where Alan's going to take over. He's going to talk about the significance of Tocqueville's Democracy in America and its relevance to today's researchers, the genesis of the project in a little bit more detail, how the database is structured, what we're planning to do in the future, and then we'll open it up to some questions and answers. It should be pretty smooth and free-flowing. Just so you know, the Democracy in America database is available for purchase. It's a perpetual access, one low fee of $250, and we are, as of right now, starting a 10% discount promotion on that database. So if your institution does not currently subscribe, now's the time to act and get it for a 10% discount. And just like everything else within HeinOnline, this database is true to print. You're actually looking at the scanned images of the book. It's easily navigable in PDF form. It's completely full text searchable. It's got interactive and editorialized sources that will show you a little bit more what Alan has put together for us. And there are multiple editions, many editions of the publication available throughout the database. There's also a LibGuide that we will jump through a little bit just to show you how it's set up, similar to many of the other LibGuides that are available within HeinOnline. And of course, if your institution does not subscribe to HeinOnline as of yet, you can always let me know, let anyone else in our sales and marketing department know. We'd be happy to set your institution up with a free trial so you can kind of see everything that HeinOnline has to offer beyond just what we're going to cover in this webinar today. This is how you can contact us, of course, telephone, email, or on the website. And then we are doing a big push on our social media outreach, so please feel free to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and of course, LinkedIn. So with that being said, let me switch my share over to my other web browser. One moment. Okay. So now here we are at the HeinOnline welcome screen. Many of you should be familiar with this. This is where you wind up once you log into HeinOnline if you're using the main login prompt. Here, what we're looking at in terms of access that I have set up for this particular demo is the HeinOnline US Core Plus database package that many of you likely have access to, or some iteration of this core. And then here, of course, we have Democracy in America. It shows up within your database listing, just as if you have access to it throughout your the other databases within your core. So I'm going to go ahead and click into here. And at this point, I'm going to throw it over to Alan to take over and talk about this database that he's helped create.
Thank you, Tim. I'm happy to be here to have an opportunity to talk about this. It's been sort of a labor of love for the last 4.5 years. So by way of introduction, as many of you may know, Tocqueville's Democracy in America is perhaps the most influential book ever written on American political life. For the purposes of brevity, I'm going to simply call it The Democracy from now on. Although the book is about America, it was originally not written for Americans. It was actually written for the French people. Tocqueville felt that understanding the democratic principles in America could go a long way in helping France and other countries with entrenched aristocracies transform into democracies. The initial volume was, which was originally published, or actually was published in Paris in 1835, and the second volume was published in 1840. By 1848, the book had already been enormously successful. And by 1848, the book had already gone through 12 different editions of just the French text. The consensus of modern scholarship, because there, when you got 1 million editions, like, okay, what's an authoritative text here? The consensus seems to be that for the first volume, it's the 13th edition, which was published in 1850. And the second volume, it's the 12th edition, published in 1848. The Reeves translation, which seems to be at the root of a lot of at least all of the 19th century translations, was first published in England almost simultaneously with the original book in 1835. But what it did was it helped spread Tocqueville's ideas on democracy in America widely throughout the English-speaking world, and it too was a huge hit. However, it didn't last. While Tocqueville did fall somewhat out of favor in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, interest in the book again began to grow in the US, at least in the 1930s, and oddly in France beginning in the 1970s. In the 21st century, as noted Tocqueville scholar James Schliefer wrote in his Chicago companion to Tocqueville's Democracy in America, and this is an interesting quote. He says, "Understanding Tocqueville's book is never straightforward. Tocqueville's striking ability to appeal to readers across a wide spectrum of opinion and outlook is one reason for the enduring attraction of his work. Democracy is now read less for what he praised about the United States than for what he warned democratic society against. Today, Tocqueville's portrait of America is seen through a much darker lens." And I think given our current political environment, a lot of this is somewhat prescient. I should say at this point, over the last 3 decades, there have been at least 5 English language translations that have been published. These newer translations tend to be more attuned to the nuances and subtleties of the French and English languages than their 19th century counterparts. However, for the purposes of this project, copyright restrictions prohibited their use. But with increased interest in the book, the volume of scholarship on democracy has only grown. The democracy touches on the areas of law, political science, history, and the social sciences, among others. But over the years, it has also become required reading in many undergraduate programs in these disciplines. In fact, I first read bits and pieces of it when I was in college, whoa, those many years ago. In terms of the scholarship, for example, one of the premier journals in the area of Tocqueville studies is the Tocqueville Review, which we added in February, which HeinOnline added in February of this year, I think. It's published by the Tocqueville Society. As I was working on the research for this, for the project, after it got greenlighted, I was having a devil of a time trying to find some of these early articles, because most sites that have the Tocqueville Review only have like the last 20 years or so. Hein goes all the way back to Volume 1, Issue 1, which is, if you're doing work in the area of Tocqueville studies, like this is a must-have journal. As Tim mentioned, the journal, as Tim mentioned, the project started the summer of 2017 when I had just decided I want to read this book after 40 years of being out of college. I thought I wanted to read it cover to cover. And I finished it just before landing at the airport in Austin, Texas, right before an American Association of Law Libraries conference. And during the conference, I went and spoke to Hein, pitched the article, pitched the idea, and by September, they had green-lighted it. One of the first issues we had to surmount was finding an edition. And because of copyright and licensing, we eventually settled on the 1862 Bowen translation, which is a revision of the earlier Reeves translation. As hindsight would have it, I later discovered that Hein had a translation by Phillips Bradley, which was the last revision of the Reeves translation. It was published in 1945 by Knopf. Our future plans call for creating a second digital edition based on that text, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. We did have several issues that we had to overcome to get this to work. But we had to work within the HeinOnline environment. We had to do some development work. We had to come up with a way to display the overall content of the library, which was basically the tabbed format. Then we had to come up with a way to display notes, sources, the content itself, the digital edition, plus the linked resources. So we came up with a three window method. The left window, which is on your left, has the notes, the page citations, and on the left window. The center window here is the text of the Bowen edition. So you can see, for example, judicial power of the United States is, Tim, if you'll click on sources.
Sure thing.
Yeah, sorry. You'll see judicial power of the United States is the text that's highlighted down here in the center window. So if you click on that, it will take you to this edition of the book. The center window is the text. The right window was where you display the linked content. We also had to come up with a way.
I'm just going to change the way that I share just so we can see that pop up.
Okay. And while you're doing that, I'll continue.
Yeah.
One of the interesting aspects we had to come up with was a way to highlight text. And with a little bit of ingenuity on the part of the company, we accomplished this by indexing an OCR layer that actually overlays the page image. The links are in blue, but if there's just a textual note, it's in green. The idea here was that you can go from the left window immediately and not have to count lines as to where an entry is. We also in terms of we had, as Tim mentioned, there are like 1,700 analytical links here that are included in this in both volumes of the book. We've also included links for material that's free, but it's not in HeinOnline. It just links out to stuff that's freely available on the web. But we've also, if there's resources that are located behind paywalls or not for free, we have simply noted those so that if you have access to those through other sources, you at least know that something exists. One of the last items we had to come up with was the structure of the page citations that could be uniform across all resources. And that was basically, we borrowed that from, for those of you who are familiar with the Library of America, we borrowed that from their volumes. It's basically the volume, page number, and line number. And that's across, we've used that same structure across all different titles. The basic structure of the entire library was the tabs on the home page. These up here at the top. The digital edition, because some people may want to only look at volume 2, so we created a tab for each volume. To this, as I say, we added the links for the 1,700 analytical sources. There are navigational links included, so you can move from within the text. For example, if there's a footnote that says, okay, I want to go to Appendix C, then you click on the Appendix C and it will take you to, it will display the text of Appendix C. We also took, I also took extensive notes that provided insight into Tocqueville's ideas or to the translated text, which are drawn from other translations, including the NOLA French-English translation from the Liberty Fund, the Goldhammer translation from the Library of America, the Bradley translation that I mentioned earlier from Knopf, the Bevan translation from Penguin Books, and the Mansfield and Winthrop version from the University of Chicago Press. I also included, in terms of the reference sources, links to external explanatory articles, some from the Encyclopedia Britannica that provide biographical or topical information on persons that are mentioned in the Tocqueville text. Okay, the next tab is the Works Cited tab, which is the last one on the top row on the right. This is an A to Z list of all the electronic versions of sources that were cited or used by Tocqueville that we could locate. There are some that we could not locate. And usually that was due to the fact that Tocqueville was not always as precise as we would have hoped in terms of identifying what resource he was using. And there are some cases, for example, where where the translator has included it in English, but literally it's a translation from an English work that was translated to French and then translated back to English, which can be fraught with all kinds of issues. The Editions and Translations tab, which is the bottom, this is where we have included listings for all of the various editions of Democracy in America that we have added so far. We are continuing to add to this list. But because as you can see, it's already quite extensive. We had to make a conscious decision what to do about partial translations. And because there are lots of books out there that have only translated bits and pieces of it, I simply made an executive decision, an editorial decision on my part, not to include partial translations. And I should say, while the focus is mainly on English translations to begin with, there are translations in other languages that were identified: Chinese, German, Italian, Spanish, Russian, and all these, I hope, will eventually be added as we find them. The related works tab, which is the next tab, lists works that are sort of related to democracy in America and its influence. This area will also be growing. The scholarly articles tab is where we have lumped in all of the scholarship that we have started with. This area is growing. Most recently, in the third update to this library, we included the articles from the Tocqueville Review that relate specifically to democracy in America. And there are now quite a few. And many of those articles, I should say, are by preeminent Tocqueville scholars. So a lot of these names kept popping up in my research. Tim mentioned the LibGuide earlier, and I'm going to turn the show back over to him, and he can tell you a little bit more about the LibGuide. Tim?
Thanks. Yep. Thanks, Alan. So as what you've seen, what Alan has kind of walked you through so far, you can see that this database, while it falls within the HeinOnline framework, it is unique in that we have the sources page that pops up when you go onto a page that has different sources linked to it, and with Alan's annotations, as well as that green and blue linking. Now, you're probably used to the blue inline linking that we provide for cited works throughout, like the journals database and elsewhere in HeinOnline, but this has got the green too. So with those notes, so it's a little bit different. It might take a little bit of learning. So that's why we put together this LibGuide. It gives you obviously what is the data, what is the publication, what is Democracy in America. It gives you an understanding of how to go about using the digital editions, note about the chapter designations, additional resources related to Democracy in America. So while Alan has put together an absolutely fantastic resource regarding Democracy in America and related works and related scholarly articles, we've done a little bit more on how to go about using the database and as well as related blog posts and so on. As you're probably also aware, we have many other LibGuides available, not just for Democracy in America, but for many of the other databases that are available within HeinOnline. And as I always say, these LibGuides are there for you. We create them for you, our end users. So by all means, please feel free to go in and use these LibGuides, take the information that is relevant to what you need, and go ahead and put it up onto your own LibGuides and steal it from us. Please do. That's why we put this information together. So I just wanted to show you that real quickly, and we'll jump back to the database.
I should add at this point that digital edition is you could say it's somewhat of a misnomer because of and a lot of the notes and things that are drawn from myriad other sources. You could really call it more of a composite edition because it does talk about variant text variants that are between this and more modern, and trying to include the more modern scholarship. What we'd like to do now is sort of give you a brief look at how it actually works. I mentioned the page citation structure earlier for navigating, and as I said, that applies to all of your all the various resources are all using the same citation structure. There is a 3-window format. You've got the content and source window on the left, the Bowen edition in the middle, and when you have a link to something like that, it'll be highlighted in the Bowen text, but it will also bring it up in the right-hand window. At least it's supposed to.
There we go.
Yeah. So, and again, if there's a note, you can always get even though the screen disappears, you can always get back to the sources screen by clicking on the sources button, and it will bring up that left window. The notes can get a little bit voluminous, like you'll see the 175.33, but I've tried to make them as clear and as understandable as possible, and and also for giving credit to the people who've actually done the research. You'll notice at the bottom of page 175, you see chapter 6 entitled Judicial Power in the United States. If you click that, as Tim just did, it brings up chapter 6 of the book. The green text that's right below it is merely a note that, yeah, and it gives you more in detail about why that's there. As Tim demonstrated, the content and the source pop-up windows can be toggled on and off using the buttons provided on the screen. It's really kind of cool. As I say, I've spent 4 years working on this. I have learned so much. To be honest, I in no way consider myself to be a Tocqueville scholar, although I have learned a great deal about Tocqueville in doing this project. And I look forward to continuing to work on it, to build it, to make it better. So I'm willing to entertain questions, and with hope, I'll have some answers.
And Alan, I did really want to mention before we jump into questions that while we didn't show it, but I did mention it earlier, the search box is at the top of the screen. This is completely full text searchable, just as if anything else is within HeinOnline. It's just that we've added a significant amount of metadata and annotations to this as well. So we haven't really focused on the searching, but it searches just as if you were using any other database within HeinOnline.
Oh, okay. Good point. Good point.
Let's look and see. What do we have? Any questions?
Oh, yep, we do have a really good question here, Tim. Do you see the first question there that we have?
Is this the one about LibriVox?
Yes. So, yes, correct.
Let's see here. Because it is in the public domain, volunteers at LibriVox have read the monograph and provide audio links to stream or download. Yeah,
and the question was, is there audio available?
Oh, well, there is not currently audio available through HeinOnline, but if I'm sure that's something we could potentially look at developing in one of our future developments. There is a number of future developments that we're going to be working on with this database moving forward. And while audio has not been one of the bullet points, that doesn't mean it can't be. So to answer your question, no, but we will definitely take that into consideration.
Let me take a stab at the next question.
Sure.
Which says, are there important differences in meaning between the various editions? And this may also help answer the first question about audio. What I discovered, and it's quite evident if you just look at the 5 translations published in the last few years, but it's really noticeable in terms of the 19th century translations. Certain passages, while they may be the same in French, are translated very differently into English. For example, Bowen rewrote Reeves' translation of the first volume almost in its entirety. There are vast differences between those two editions. And I think what it pointed out to me, and I guess I should have realized this earlier, is that when you're translating from one language to another is sort of an inexact science to begin with, which is part of the reason that I included as many of the notes from the other translations as I could into this one, so that the user wouldn't have to go find all this stuff. It would be there for their use. I hope that I hope that answers that question.
I think so. I think that makes sense. Do you see the next question down, Alan?
What did I discover about Tocqueville that was the most interesting or surprising? The one thing and this may sound sort of hilarious, but I discovered that the Tocqueville Chateau, which is where is the Tocqueville home place in Normandy, France, where Tocqueville finished the volumes, is actually still in existence and is actually now a hotel, and you can go stay there if you want to. So I have a trip planned to Normandy, France, and the plan is to go spend the night at the Tocqueville Chateau.
That's pretty great.
But as far as now, that's sort of an aside, but what I found interesting was in the second volume, which when Tocqueville wrote it in the mid 1830s, it's very theoretical at that point. He didn't have the background that he would later have in life, and I wondered if he might have written the second volume differently had he had the knowledge base that he had near the end of his life. I thought that was rather interesting.
That makes a lot of sense.
As I say, I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book. I would particularly recommend, and I don't know if this is legit or not, but from my perspective, having read all of them, the one that I think is the most elegant is the Goldhammer translation from the Library of America. It's a one-volume set, a one-volume edition. It almost ends up being you can't put it down.
Alan, do you see the last question? Is the original French version included? I should probably know that, but
not the first edition, but the second edition.
Okay.
Which was published also in 1835. And there were the only difference between those two editions was they corrected some printer errors and introduced some other printer errors. So I'm trying to find the first edition is the one that I'm trying to find. It's, to say the least, rather rare.
Yeah, I would imagine.
There are numerous French editions in there. Certainly the 12th, the ones that scholars consider to be the authoritative texts are there.
All right. Well, thanks, Alan.
Good question. Good questions all.
Absolutely. Well, I think that does it for questions. Alan, thank you very much. That was outstanding. I know I learned a lot. Thank you all for attending. It was fantastic to have you all. I'm sorry we went a little over time, but I really wanted to hear what Alan had to say about that. So as you know, this is being recorded, so you will receive a link to it so you can watch it again at your leisure, and keep an eye out for an announcement on what the November webinar will be. I think we're going to be doing that after Thanksgiving. So just keep an eye out and you'll get information about what's to come. Thank you all again. Have a great day, and we will be talking to you soon.
Thank you, everybody.